Let's explore the history of the Beatles as we visit areas in London that they lived in, performed in, and changed the course of music history in. We are huge Beatles fans, so this is like a pilgrimage for us that we've been wanting to do for decades and decades. So
we are so excited to go.
We can't wait.
We're starting in the only place in London where the Fab Four all live together. Shortly after the Beatles moved to London, they moved here in Flat L.
They mainly crashed here in between gigs, so they didn't live here too long, especially John, because he had a wife and a baby, so he moved out shortly after. Because there are so many Beatles locations and so little time, we are filming this over multiple days, so if you see us in different outfits, that's why. Now let's see where Beatlemania started.
On October 13th, 1963, the Beatles appeared on the famous show Sunday Night at the London Palladium. The screams of the female fans were so loud and constant that the Daily Mail reported on Beatlemania the next day.
The Palladium is cool and all, but what does this mean? There's a story somewhere there, I don't know.
At the height of Beatlemania, the Beatles manager, Brian Epstein, worked here.
Epstein's company NEMS was here from 1963 to 1964 before they eventually expanded and relocated. It's kind of weird that it's now a Five Guys, but it makes sense because there were five guys: John, Paul, George, Ringo, and Brian Epstein. We're about to see some locations where the Beatles lived, and this first spot is not where you would expect one of the biggest rock stars in the world to live. This is where Paul McCartney lived with his then-girlfriend Jane Asher and her family. I think the fact that Paul lived here with his girlfriend and her family just goes to show that he was a very family-oriented person, even in the height of Beatlemania. This is where Paul McCartney wrote Yesterday and Eleanor Rigby from his bedroom in the attic. Things got really crazy for Paul when he lived here in 1965, right when the Beatles were filming the movie Help in London. So get this, he would have to climb from his bedroom into the flat owned by an old army colonel at number 56. Then he would be let down into the lift and would exit into the back street through the basement flat. A lot of music legends have called this house behind me home at one point or another. Ringo was the first to lease it in 1965. Paul briefly rented this space and recorded several demos here, including I'm Looking Through You. When Paul McCartney moved out, Jimi Hendrix moved in, but during a bad acid trip, he spilled a bunch of whitewash all over the walls and was ultimately evicted. Afterwards, John Lennon moved in with Yoko Ono. Although pretty much everything the Beatles did was a success, our next location is an exception. This is where the Beatles' Apple Boutique was from 1967 to 1968. The big reason why it failed is because fans and employees preferred to steal items rather than pay for the overpriced merchandise. Honestly, the coolest thing about it was that the store had a psychedelic mural that was painted on it. The neighbors in this area, though, absolutely hated the mural, and since the Beatles never actually got permission to paint the building, they were ordered to paint over it. The building looks so boring after they painted over the mural, but I get it, it didn't really fit the aesthetic of this street. Oh man, I can spot this next building from a mile away. 3 Savile Row eventually became the headquarters of Apple Corps, the Beatles company, and it was right here where the Beatles performed their last ever performance together.
You can see the whole Rooftop performance on the documentary Get Back.
And I can't imagine just walking down the street, hearing brand new music from the Beatles, and you're like, is that the Beatles? I think it is, but I've never heard this before, and you can't see them. Just like the frenzy it must have caused.
Right. The moment we were walking down the street, when I first saw the building, I could instantly tell without seeing the address, oh, this is the building of the Rooftop concert, because I've seen that concert so many times in my life. It's quite amazing to be here in person.
It is. But not everyone was a fan of the impromptu performance, and eventually the police were called to shut it down. Before we go to our next location, we are stopping at a place I have dreamt of seeing my whole entire life. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. We're passing 5 Cavendish Avenue and now we're at 7 Cavendish Avenue. You can tell this is Paul's house because it has these security cameras. Behind me is the home of Paul McCartney. Paul purchased his home in March of 1966 and he still owns it today. I am such a huge Paul McCartney fan. I can't believe I'm standing in front of his house right now. I'm secretly hoping he'll peek out of a window or something. No sign of him yet, but it's just amazing to think that he actually lives here. This house is just a short walk away from the most famous Beatles spot in London. I can't believe it. I can't believe I'm standing at Abbey Road right now. This is like a dream come true. Right behind me is where the Beatles recorded most of their music from 1962 all the way to 1970. It's just incredible to me to be standing outside of Abbey Road Studios, just imagining the Beatles walking in and out of there on a regular basis, creating some of the best music ever made. At the time of the Beatles, this location was called EMI Studios. In 1969, the Beatles left EMI Studios and just walked right across the street over the zebra crossing to shoot the cover of their next album, Abbey Road. The Beatles photographer arranged for the road to be closed by police for just 10 minutes. He stood on a stepladder and took less than 10 photos. Ultimately, Paul McCartney chose the image for the album cover. After the release of the album Abbey Road, they ended up changing the name of the studio to Abbey Road Studios. Just like the chaos of this moment. Yeah, if you're ever going to cross Abbey Road, just cross it. Don't stop in the middle of the road.
A photo takes the moment and freezes it forever.
Just keep walking. I have like no words for being here. It's so exciting.
By far the biggest highlight for me was going to Abbey Road because ever since I was a kid, I've dreamt of doing my own Abbey Road crossing photo and it felt amazing to finally get one.
What was your favorite Beatles spot that we went to? Comment below and let us know. And as always, thanks for watching. And the Beatles walked out of across.
Just making sure it's not gonna, okay, what am I saying?